You know, what if I told you that the most cataclysmic conflict in American history is still, to this day, profoundly misunderstood by so many? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely pierce through the veil of myth and dig into the true origins of a nation that literally turned against itself. So for over a century and a half, this fierce debate has just raged on among historians, politicians, and everyday citizens alike. What actually ignited the American Civil War? Was it strictly about the horrific institution of slavery? Was it some high-level constitutional argument over states' rights? Or was it fundamentally just driven by economics? Well, as we're going to see, it was really an unavoidable, violent collision of all three of those things, woven into a crisis that absolutely no compromise was ever going to stop. But before we can even unpack those causes, we really need to grasp the sheer devastating scale of this tragedy. Between 1861 and 1865, this conflict extinguished over 600,000 lives. That's a staggering number. It effectively destroyed the old republic to give birth to a completely new one. And to understand why that massive amount of bloodshed became inevitable, we have to look backward.
Chapter 1. A Nation Born Divided.
Okay, so long before the very first shots were ever fired at Fort Sumter, America was already deeply fractured. When independence from Britain was declared back in 1776, slavery was already deeply entrenched in the country. And the Founding Fathers, well, they fully recognized this as a glaring contradiction to the whole liberty and equality ideal, but they failed to eliminate it. They basically just kicked the can down the road. They left those fundamental questions unresolved in the Constitution, which created this incredibly fragile, ticking time bomb at the heart of the Republic. And as the young nation started expanding westward, every single new territory raised the exact same explosive question. Would slavery be allowed there?
This brings us to Chapter 2, Two Different Americas.
By the early 1800s, it's like we're looking at two entirely different planets. The North and South were fracturing into completely incompatible societies. The North was quickly becoming this booming industrial powerhouse, forging iron, laying down miles of railroads, and pulling in this massive immigrant workforce. The South, on the other hand, its economy remained strictly agricultural, relying entirely on the forced, brutal servitude of millions of enslaved African Americans to produce enormous cash crops.
And in the antebellum South, cotton was absolute king. After Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793, processing the crop became just extraordinarily fast and ridiculously profitable. Demand skyrocketed across Europe and the northern states, and production just exploded. Just look at this. By 1860, this single commodity, often called white gold, accounted for more than half of all American exports. That is a massive chunk of the economy.
So for Southern planters, their intense prosperity, and honestly, their entire way of life, was inextricably chained to slavery. Meanwhile, Northern statesmen were growing increasingly alarmed at the idea of it expanding. This wasn't just some minor economic disagreement. This was the literal kindling for a political inferno that was about to combust.
Chapter 3. The Debate Over Slavery. Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand the political battlefield here. You'll hear the phrase states' rights thrown around a lot. This idea that states held sovereignty over federal overreach. But historians broadly agree that the underlying catalyst for invoking this doctrine was fundamentally the protection and preservation of slavery. It was a fight over the right to own people.
The discord wasn't about abstract political theory. It all came down to one burning question. As America expanded westward, would the chains of slavery expand with it? Southern politicians demanded total non-interference, while Northern politicians pushed for federal authority to stop its spread. Because think about it, every new territory threatened to completely upend the balance of power in Congress. It was a fierce zero-sum struggle for political dominance.
Chapter 4. The Missouri Crisis.
Let's look at how this played out in 1819. Missouri applies to join the Union as a slave state, and Washington just erupts. If Missouri enters as a slave state, Southern influence in the Senate shoots up, which Northern lawmakers obviously opposed. So, to prevent a total government meltdown, Congress engineers the Missouri Compromise. Missouri enters as a slave state, Maine enters as a free state to keep the balance, and they literally draw a line in the sand straight across the Louisiana Territory, forbidding slavery's expansion to the north of it. For a hot second, Americans thought they had fixed it. It was a solution. Well, actually, scratch that. It wasn't a solution at all. It was a total illusion of peace.
The compromise just kicked the can down the road again, burying this ticking time bomb even deeper into the nation's foundation. The real fundamental conflict hadn't been resolved in the slightest.
Chapter 5. A growing nation, a growing crisis.
Fast forward to the 1840s and 50s. After the Mexican-American War, the U.S. grabs these vast new Western territories, and boom, the debate reignites. But this time, it's so much worse. Politicians are right back to screaming over whether slavery will be allowed in these new lands. New partisan divides rip the public apart, newspapers start fanning the flames of outrage, and tragically, actual physical violence starts replacing civil political debate.
Put yourself in their shoes for a second, watching the very fabric of your country tear apart. The nation was at this incredibly dangerous crossroads. Some folks were still desperately clinging to the hope of a compromise, while others looked at the violence and the gridlock and realized, man, open conflict is basically unavoidable at this point. But no one, absolutely no one, knew the true scale of the devastation that was coming. By the late 1850s, the final pillars of compromise just completely collapse. Bloodshed erupts on the plains of Kansas. We get a deeply polarizing, shocking Supreme Court decision. An abolitionist named John Brown literally lights a match with a radical armed raid. And finally, the election of one man to the presidency, Abraham Lincoln, triggers the secession of several southern states, decisively and officially fracturing the Union.
And just like that, the road to the Civil War was sealed. It leaves us with this haunting question to chew on today. What actually happens when a nation's foundational compromises finally shatter its political system? It forces us to ask how any republic, built upon the ideals of liberty, can survive the violent reckoning of its own deepest contradictions. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning history, and I'll see you on the next one.
Well, picture this. It's the early 1850s, and the United States is standing right on the absolute edge of a political disaster. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a critical, ticking clock period in American history. For decades, lawmakers basically relied on this fragile web of compromises to keep the Union intact. But the reality, each agreement just kicked the can down the road. None of them actually solved the underlying issue of slavery. And if you pay attention to the historical English language of the time, the rhetoric was getting sharper and more dangerous by the day. Every new territory added, every election held, and every heated debate on the congressional floor pushed the nation closer to the breaking point. The question wasn't if America faced a crisis anymore. The question was simply, how much longer can the Union actually survive this irrepressible conflict? So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 5 sections: the collapse of compromise, culture and bloodshed, the Dred Scott decision, a house divided, and finally, the point of no return. Okay, let's dive into this. When you track the escalating events of the 1850s, it reveals a pretty terrifying progression. We start with the Compromise of 1850, move through the massive cultural shockwave of Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, hit the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, the legal earthquake of the Dred Scott decision in 1857, and then arrive at the legendary Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. Now, keep this progression in your mind. Each of these milestones was basically a hammer blow to the foundation of the Union. Let's look closer at where this rapid escalation really kicked off. Section 1. The collapse of compromise. Or maybe a better way to put it, the illusion of peace.
Right after the Mexican-American War, Congress tried to balance the scales with the Compromise of 1850. Think of it kind of like a giant puzzle. For the North, California entered the Union as a free state, while Utah and New Mexico were left to this grand democratic experiment called popular sovereignty. But to appease the South, Congress passed a draconian Fugitive Slave Act. It was this hugely complex web of legislation meant to hold the nation together. But ironically, it completely enraged both sides.
So what was the Fugitive Slave Act? It legally compelled everyday citizens in free states to assist in the capture of runaway slaves. Suddenly, Northerners who morally opposed slavery, often using the era's famous linguistic euphemism, the peculiar institution, were federally mandated slave catchers. This was a real game changer, and the pushback was absolutely visceral. Entire communities openly defied the federal government, while others ramped up their secret networks to spirit the enslaved to freedom through the Underground Railroad. Instead of cooling things down, this mandate literally poured fuel on the fire.
Moving right along to Section 2, Culture and Bloodshed. This is where the debate leaves the halls of Congress.
And this brilliantly illustrates that massive cultural shift. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, and this is a perfect example of how the historical English language and the written word quite literally changed history. Across the northern states, readers who had never even seen a plantation suddenly felt the agonizing human cost of slavery through her storytelling. The idea spread like wildfire.
Meanwhile, Southern leadership fiercely condemned the novel as slanderous fiction, arguing it deeply misrepresented their society. Whether it was championed or reviled, the book completely severed the national psyche in two.
So with tensions totally boiling over, in literature and culture, politicians desperately tried, once again, to find a political solution. They were asking themselves, would democracy solve the problem? Could just letting the people vote actually ease these tensions? Well, this brings us to a really dramatic pivot in 1854. Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, essentially doubling down on popular sovereignty. Supporters naively hoped that pushing the debate out of Washington and into the hands of local settlers would be the ultimate democratic remedy. Basically, let the ballot box decide, they argued, and the nation can finally wash its hands of the conflict. But the outcome, it was disastrous. Instead of peaceful voting, thousands of armed partisans, often called border ruffians, which is such a vivid linguistic term from the era, flooded right into Kansas, totally desperate to seize control of the territory. Homes were torched, printing presses were smashed, and the territory earned the grim historical moniker Bleeding Kansas. The Civil War had essentially already begun, just on a smaller scale out on the frontier.
Section 3, the Dred Scott Decision. This is the legal point of no return.
By 1857, political and cultural remedies had completely failed. The Supreme Court took up a case centered on Dred Scott, an enslaved man who argued that his time living in free territories legally made him a free man. Instead of granting him freedom, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney issued an absolute judicial earthquake. Using some of the most chilling legal language in American history, the court ruled that African Americans possessed no rights which the white man was bound to respect. That meant they were not citizens, and they couldn't even sue in federal court. Furthermore, the court struck down Congress's authority to prohibit slavery in federal territories entirely.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how a definitive legal ruling, one that was actually meant to settle the issue once and for all, only ripped the country further apart. To Northern activists, it was a complete outrage. They feared it essentially erased the whole concept of free soil. Yet Southern leaders welcomed the ruling as an ironclad confirmation of their constitutional rights. So the legal middle ground, it was officially gone.
Section 4, a House divided, and the massive eruption of Abraham Lincoln.
During all this extreme volatility, a relatively unknown Illinois lawyer steps right into the national spotlight. Abraham Lincoln firmly opposed the expansion of slavery, though his paramount primary goal was always preserving the Union. In 1858, he challenged Senator Stephen A. Douglas in a series of marathon open-air debates. And here's where the mastery of historical English language really shines. Through the booming medium of telegraphs and daily print newspapers, Lincoln's towering rhetoric captivated millions of people. He was brilliantly defining the exact parameters of the national crisis.
So the crucial point is captured right here in this quote. During one of his most famous speeches, Lincoln declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He eloquently argued that the United States could not remain permanently divided between free and slave states. Eventually, it would have to become all one thing or all the other. Now, actually, Lincoln lost that specific Senate election to Douglas, but this prophetic warning anchored his emergence in history and cemented his national reputation as a powerful, visionary leader.
Section 5, the point of no return, the final countdown.
By 1860, the old political parties were just splitting at the seams. Let's look at this rapid-fire climax. First, abolitionist John Brown launches an armed raid on Harper's Ferry. This absolutely terrifies the South, convincing many that the North actually intended violence. Second, just months later, Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency without a single Southern electoral vote. And third, the immediate devastating fallout. Within weeks, the first Southern states vote to secede from the Union. The whole shebang was unraveling. The dominoes had officially fallen. Which leaves us with this final, chilling question. How quickly can a nation collapse when the willingness to compromise completely disappears? We've seen how over just a single decade, every attempt to find middle ground only highlighted how fundamentally divided the nation was. From the halls of Congress to the battlegrounds of Bleeding Kansas to the highest court in the land, the breakdown was absolute. The countdown to war was over. The American Civil War had begun. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive into the collapse of compromise has given you a clearer understanding of this incredibly pivotal moment in history.
All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Imagine walking the streets of America back in the late 1850s. You wouldn't just find a country tangled up in politics. You'd find a nation literally paralyzed by fear. So how exactly did a series of cascading events turn that simmering paranoia into the absolute deadliest conflict in American history? Let's break it down. Section 1. A nation divided by fear. Right before the breaking point, a crippling, total lack of trust defined the country. People in the North were terrified that slavery was going to expand its reach across the entire nation. Meanwhile, folks in the South were looking at every single political move as a direct attack on their economy, their way of life, and their political influence. We're talking about two regions viewing the survival of the country through completely different, entirely terrified lenses. Section 2. John Brown's Raid, October 1859. Okay, so into this total powder keg steps an abolitionist named John Brown. He had this radically daring plan. Step 1, hit the federal armory at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Step 2, grab thousands of weapons. And step 3, use those weapons to spark a massive uprising, encouraging enslaved people to rise up and fight for their freedom. It was a huge, huge gamble. But as an actual military operation, it was a disaster, pretty much from minute one. I mean, within minutes of the raid starting, local militia had the armory completely surrounded. Hours later, U.S. Marines stormed the building, and actually, fun fact, they were led by Colonel Robert E. Lee. Shortly after that, John Brown was captured, tried for treason, and sentenced to death. But right before his execution, he made it crystal clear he believed he was sacrificing himself for justice. The really crucial takeaway here, though, is the aftermath. This one single event completely fractured the nation's psyche. In the North, a lot of people saw Brown as a martyr, a guy who gave his life for the ultimate cause of ending slavery. But down in the South, Brown's raid was basically their worst existential nightmare coming true. To them, it was absolute proof that violent attacks were a real, imminent threat. It totally deepened their mistrust and convinced many that the federal government simply couldn't protect them anymore. Section 3, the election of 1860. A nation fractures. So, with everyone's nerves already totally frayed, the political dynamics of 1860 were just unprecedented. The Democratic Party literally split right down the middle into northern and southern factions. That fractured their voting base and pretty much doomed their chances. Meanwhile, you had this newly formed political force, the Republican Party, and they were completely united. They nominated Abraham Lincoln, rallying entirely around one core issue: stopping the expansion of slavery into new territories. Now, Lincoln's stance here is fascinating. He was absolutely against slavery expanding, for sure, but he also stated repeatedly and very publicly that his main immediate goal was simply preserving the Union. But because the opposition was just so fractured, Lincoln managed to win the presidency without carrying most of the southern states. That right there, it perfectly captures the absolute shock among southern political leaders. The realization that a president could actually be elected without their support signaled to them that their political power was evaporating. And this fear pushed them toward drastic, unprecedented measures, even before Abraham Lincoln took the oath of office. Section 4. Secession begins. The Union breaks. Suddenly, all those abstract fears turned into concrete, historic actions. And the timeline here is breathtakingly fast. December 20th, 1860, South Carolina becomes the first state to announce it's seceding. Within mere weeks, it's a rapid chain reaction. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all jump ship. And they didn't just leave. They formed a brand new independent nation called the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis as their president. What's wild is how this massive political crisis instantly morphed into a profound constitutional crisis. And honestly, it really all came down to the historical English language of the nation's founding document. Because, the 18th century text of the Constitution was actually totally silent on whether a state could explicitly leave this more perfect union. Both sides insisted they were defending the law. Confederate leaders argued the historical phrasing inherently allowed sovereign states to just voluntarily withdraw. But President-elect Lincoln, he strongly disagreed. He interpreted the text language to mean the Union was a permanent, absolutely unbreakable contract. Historians study a ton of factors behind this mass exit, and Southern leaders frequently brought up states' rights, federal power, and economics. However, when we read the official written declarations issued by the seceding states themselves, they placed a massive emphasis on protecting the institution of slavery. So the broad historical consensus is undeniably that slavery was the central driving issue behind secession, with the debates over states' rights inextricably linked right back to it. Section 5. The attack on Fort Sumter, April 1861. By early 1861, any hope for a political compromise was completely dead. The nation is standing right on the absolute brink, and all eyes turn to this one small, isolated Union military base sitting in Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter. The fort was still under federal control, commanded by Major Robert Anderson. Confederate leaders demanded he surrender immediately. Anderson said no. So before dawn on April 12th, Confederate artillery opened fire. For more than 30 excruciating hours, shells just rained down on the fort until Anderson was finally forced to surrender. Surprisingly, very few casualties occurred during this initial bombardment, yet that relentless shelling officially marked the beginning of the American Civil War. The ripple effect? Instantaneous. The second news of the attack hits Washington, President Lincoln calls for volunteers to defend the Union. And that direct response prompted 4 more states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, to abandon the Union and join the Confederacy. The conflict that everyone had feared for decades was now officially, terrifyingly real. As the smoke cleared over Charleston Harbor, millions of Americans were confidently preparing for a quick little skirmish, something they actually thought would be wrapped up in just a few short months. They had no idea the absolute devastation that was waiting for them. Which leaves us with a haunting question. How exactly did a supposedly short skirmish turn into America's deadliest conflict? Well, we'll answer that in our next explainer as we explore the early, brutal struggles, the rise of legendary commanders, and see how this war changed America forever. Catch you then. Welcome to the explainer. Let's just dive right in, shall we? We're picking up the timeline in April 1861, right as the bombardment of Fort Sumter is kicking off. Now, at this exact moment, it's kind of wild to think about, but both the Union and the Confederacy held this incredibly naive belief. They were absolutely convinced this whole political crisis was going to be a quick, glorious little conflict, wrapped up in just a few short months. Young men were literally rushing to enlist, completely fired up. Families were at train stations saying these solemn, but honestly pretty hopeful goodbyes. The general vibe was basically, go out, settle this dispute real quick, and be back home sitting by the fire long before the year was even out. Well, they were wrong. Just totally, utterly wrong. That shattered illusion, that whole fantasy of a quick and easy fix, was about to escalate so rapidly. What started as a political crisis was going to plunge the entire continent into the absolute bloodiest, most devastating war in American history. And, we see that grand illusion break down almost immediately. Fast forward just a bit to July 1861, Union forces are marching toward Manassas, Virginia for what becomes the First Battle of Bull Run. The plan seems simple enough, right? Defeat the Confederate Army, keep marching, and capture the capital at Richmond. The optimism was actually so high that thousands, literally thousands of civilians rode down from Washington, D.C. with picnic baskets. They fully expected to just sit back and watch a swift Union victory unfold right in front of them. But the reality? Oh man, the reality was outright calamity. Instead of this glorious, orderly victory, those spectators were met with sheer chaos. The whole thing ended with a panicked, totally confused Union retreat right back up to Washington. But right in the middle of all that chaos, you get these incredible human moments. During the battle, Confederate forces, led by Generals Johnston and Beauregard, somehow managed to hold their ground against the Union push. But it was one specific commander, Thomas Jackson, who really etched his name into history that afternoon. He's standing there, totally resolute, taking incredibly heavy fire, and his sheer determination actually prompts another officer to point and shout, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." And honestly, from that one fiery moment, he's forever immortalized as Stonewall Jackson. This battle was a massive wake-up call. It shocked the nation to its core and made it painfully clear to everyone there was absolutely no way this was going to be a short or easy war. So, reality sets in. President Lincoln and the Union realized they need a serious, multi-pronged strategy. The whole quick strike idea is out the window. They draw up a new blueprint with 2 main steps. Step 1? That's still the core imperative. Preserve the United States by achieving a total military defeat of the Confederacy. But step 2? That was the long game. They needed a concerted, systematic effort to gradually grind down the Southern economy and its military capabilities. To actually pull off that gradual weakening, General Winfield Scott pitches what becomes known as the Anaconda Plan. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The whole idea was to slowly squeeze the life out of the Confederacy, just like a snake. They planned to throw down this massive naval blockade on all the southern ports, meaning no vital supplies or trade are getting in or out. At the same time, Union forces needed to secure absolute control of the mighty Mississippi River. If they could pull that off, it would effectively slice the South right in two, completely severing their internal supply lines. Now contrast that massive offensive setup with what the Confederacy was trying to do. The South had a completely different playbook. They didn't need to conquer the North at all. Their strategy was purely defensive. They basically just had to survive. The plan was to fiercely defend their own territory and just wait it out until the Union got so exhausted by the sheer cost of the war that they'd just throw in the towel and accept Southern independence. And a huge piece of this puzzle, they were banking hard on getting formal recognition from major foreign powers, specifically Britain or France. They figured if Europe recognizes us as an independent nation, victory is basically guaranteed. Which brings us to part 1. Robert E. Lee commanding the South. So, it's 1862, and General Robert E. Lee takes command of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. And Lee is fascinating because he's a man of deep historical conflict himself. I mean, he had served with immense distinction in the United States Army for decades. But when his home state of Virginia seceded, he makes this incredibly fateful choice to abandon a lifetime of federal service just to fight for his state. He quickly builds this formidable reputation as one of history's great military commanders. Because, look, even though his army was frequently way smaller and constantly lacking supplies compared to the North, Lee used these incredibly bold, aggressive tactics to repeatedly outmaneuver larger Union forces. But, and this is a big but, every single one of those tactical victories came at a completely agonizing human cost. We're talking thousands upon thousands of soldiers dying on both sides. When you look back across the timeline of these first couple years, it really hits you just how much time and how much blood had already been spent. You go from that initial spark at Fort Sumter in April 1861, right into the chaotic reality check at Bull Run, and then through the grueling, deadly rise of General Lee in 1862. It's against this backdrop of just staggering loss and prolonged suffering that President Abraham Lincoln makes a decision that fundamentally shifts the entire moral stakes of the conflict on January 1st, 1863.
Moving on to part 2, a war for freedom, the emancipation.
So, while Lincoln's original goal was strictly preserving the Union, this grueling war was demanding a higher moral calling. On the 1st of January 1863, he issues the Emancipation Proclamation. This was profound. It declared that enslaved people in any areas currently under Confederate control were, from that moment on, considered free. Now, yeah, it's true it didn't instantly grant freedom to everyone held in bondage across the entire continent, but its strategic and moral impact, absolutely massive. It entirely transformed the purpose of the war. It wasn't just about territorial preservation anymore, it was officially a righteous crusade to end slavery where the Confederacy held power. And here's the strategic kicker. Elevating the moral stakes of the war completely trapped those foreign powers we talked about earlier. Nations like Britain and France, who had already proudly abolished slavery in their own empires, well, they were now completely discouraged from stepping in to support the Confederacy.
And you really have to consider this staggering number, 180,000. In the wake of the Emancipation Proclamation, there is this massive influx of African American men stepping forward for the Union cause. By the end of the war, nearly 180,000 Black soldiers had courageously joined the ranks, and they served with just unimaginable bravery. What's even more incredible is they did this while facing severe, systemic discrimination and blatantly unequal treatment from the exact same government they were bleeding to preserve. Make no mistake, their service and their sacrifice became an absolutely crucial, undeniable cornerstone of the Union's eventual victory.
All right, part 3.